Hello everyone, welcome to this morning's CPD webinar. My name is Rebecca Kemp, I'm the editor of FCNA, and today I'm going to be joined by Tamlite Lighting's Darren Taylor. So Darren Taylor, MSLL, is the National Specification and Projects Manager at Tamlite Lighting. He has been with Tamlite for 4 years, bringing with him a wealth of knowledge and experience from the world of light and lighting. Being a member of the Society of Light and Lighting, Darren carries with him all the education, training, relevant experience necessary to help deliver stunning projects across the country, working alongside his excellent team of specification engineers. Having delivered many webinars for Tamlite before, Darren will deliver an approved CPD covering all the aspects of how lighting can influence well-being across various areas of our lives. During the presentation, we will go through what is well-being, light and its impact on life, the importance of well-being, the role of lighting for well-being, and well-being applications. Darren will also be available to answer any questions you have at the end, so be sure to make use of his lighting background and understanding. To ask a question, please use the sidebar to the right of desktops where you can type in any queries you may have. And for mobile users, it is slightly different. So swipe left to ask any questions and swipe right to return to the presentation. Okay, so that is enough from me. And I'm now going to hand you over to Darren. Darren, you're in full control now. I'm going to switch off.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much for that introduction. As Rebecca said, there is a section at the end for Q&A. But today's presentation is entitled Lighting for Wellbeing. As it says in the bottom left-hand corner, my name is Darren Taylor and I'm the National Specification and Projects Manager for Tamlite Lighting. Throughout today's presentation, I'll also be assisted by a gentleman called Russell Foster, CBE. He's the Director of Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute at the University of Oxford. So he's got some really deep insight into lighting for well-being. So we're glad to have him along today as well. So we start with an overview of what the CPD context is going to look like today. So the first sort of few pages will be discussing what exactly is well-being. Then we'll start looking at light and its impact on life. And for those of you who are interested in things like circadian rhythm, the effect of light on the eye and hormonal effects, this is the section for you, I say. And then we're looking at the importance of well-being, the benefits of people and the business case, because clearly there is a business case to be had for well-being, because some of the requirements for well-being does involve investment. So there has to be a business case for that. So we'll discuss that in detail as well. And then we'll talk about the role of lighting for well-being and perhaps some misnomers about what effects lighting can have on our well-being, and it's quite significant, to be fair. And then we'll talk about some applications towards the end of the presentation as well, some real life applications of well-being in situ, as it were. So to start off, the big question, and I guess this is the one we could spend our whole 45 minutes on: what is well-being? Well-being for humans on planet Earth will be different for all of us, I guess. And so that's the critical bit, trying to understand what it is. It's a much broader concept. We're saying it's a moment-to-moment happiness. It's a much broader concept than a moment-to-moment happiness. It also includes things of how satisfied you are in your life as a whole. But if we turn to the Oxford English Dictionary for the definition, well-being is a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. That's the actual defined terminology of what well-being is. Well-being is not just a state of mind. As you'll see as we go through the presentation, there's a series of endorphins and chemical processes within our body that define what well-being is effectively. Okay, so there are many ways to define and measure well-being, and as you'll see on the slide here today, we've used some statistics from the Office for National Statistics, the ONS. Now, the ONS are obviously an independent body, and so their survey data is reputable, and it is used by many people within the industry to compare and contrast notes of kind. And this particular survey estimates the life satisfaction and the feeling of well-being that things have done in life are worthwhile. So it looks at happiness and anxiety at both the UK, country, regional, and county level. So it's quite an in-depth survey. And there are a number of factors really that can influence a person's well-being. and give them a sense of positivity. So a high level of well-being in a person means that they're feeling well and they're feeling positive. Obviously, pretty common sense stuff, really. You know, how well-being affects our lives actually directly or impacts our mood, our feeling of being positive, our feeling of sometimes being a little bit negative. So, you know, these surveys are important, and they're important documents to study and research. Now, to be fair, this particular survey by the ONS took place the year ending March 2019, so literally just before the pandemic, really. And I think surveys such as this and some of the other survey details that you'll see through the presentation are now really going to be coming back out with more defined and more in tune answers, I guess. Obviously, the pandemic stopped an awful lot of surveys in their tracks, but it'll be interesting to see what some of these surveys say, you know, 3 years on, particularly after such a difficult 3 years. But in particular, the ONS survey for the year ending March 2019 notes little change in persons' well-being measures in the UK. So even though we've gone through, we had, you know, some austerity and then some hopefully prosperity within the country, there was very little in the way people defined their mood change, and there was a slight improvement in average happiness ratings. It increased from 7.52 to 7.56. So really small increments of change, really. But again, really interesting survey, and I would encourage anybody to read that. So if we look at actually some of the graphs now, these again are ONS graphs, and they start looking at how people feel, their life satisfaction, their mental well-being, and crucially, if we bring it into a commercial world, their satisfaction with their jobs, and indeed their satisfaction with how their job is impacting on their life. So again, really interesting statistics there on the graphs. But again, if we then look at another well-known and reputable source is the British Council for Offices, the BCO. They also monitor their members, and again, it's 1 in 6 people from the BCO's survey feel that their workplace is diminishing their well-being. So 1 in 6 people feel diminished in their workplace for their well-being. That's a really, really important statistic, and something that we need to grab a hold of as an industry, as a lighting industry particularly, how we can help. So again, continuing with some of the numbers and statistics, there are an estimated 31.13 working persons in the UK. So if we take that 1 in 6 statistic, that's 5.18 million people are not satisfied with their well-being in their working environment. That's an incredible number, and it's a number we really need to get a hold of. The impact of the workplace affecting the person's well-being can be significant, and later in the slides, a bit later on, we'll actually define what that looks like in terms of sick days lost in the UK. And again, some of those numbers are really head-turning, and they make the business case for improving lighting in well-being. So crucially, the finish of this particular slide is to say the enhancing of the work environment can have real impact and real benefits on a person's well-being, and crucially can have real impacts on their time spent within work. And I think that's a really important case. So now we look at what is well-being, and as you'll see on screen here, there's 2 sources of information on the screen, and that's the Well Building Standards and Fitwell. So the 2 bodies that are playing a growing and influential part in this arena are the Well Building Standards and Fitwell. Both agencies are from the US. Well is managed by the International Well Building Institute in the USA. And in both cases, their aim is to improve the human health and well-being through healthy buildings. If you look at the picture on the bottom left-hand corner there, you'll see that was a picture taken of Cundall's offices. And Cundall, particularly in London, were the first office in Europe to actually be given the gold standard of certification from the Wellbeing Standard. So these 2 standards, these 2 names and these 2 industry leaders really are slugging it out, if you like, to how we produce a set of standards to implement well-being within the office space. So if we look at the well-building standards, we start delving into a little bit more information. There are 7 environmental factors that affect the person's well-being. These are air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, we mean temperature by that, and mind. They're the 7 pillars, if you like, of well-being. And as a lighting engineer, I suppose I'm really pleased that lighting is at the center of that graph, because clearly lighting is a real fundamental principle on how our mood changes within the day. And I mean natural light, not just artificial light, of course. So as a lighting manufacturer, we of course are focusing on the lighting part. Being deprived of natural light, for example, in the winter months, can lead to a lack of vitamin D. We've heard over the years the terminology of seasonal adjustment disorder, SAD syndrome, as it's called. That's a lack of vitamin D, and it's a lack of natural sunlight and natural daylight, effectively. So if you picture the scene, just if you think about it in your own mind's eye, as it were, after a poor night's sleep, if we call it that, if you open the curtains to a bright sunny day, it can really lift your spirits and lift your moods and lift your sense of well-being. Conversely, after the same poor night's sleep, if you wake up to a dark and miserable and dim, grey-lit morning, your mood shifts yet again, unfortunately, towards a negative stance. And so light has a really, really big impact on our well-being, effectively. So physically, the body can still operate on the same amount of sleep. That's not the issue. But the increase in natural light will create an increase in the sense of well-being. And again, I said earlier, what is well-being? And it's different for all of us. But there's a sense of well-being in our lives when we wake up to sunlight. I think that's a given, shall we say. So we start looking at how we live, how we work, how we learn, how we rest. Throughout the natural day, throughout the natural world, light plays a key role in enhancing the day. In our day-to-day rhythms, our human-centric clock, effectively. So if we wake up again to sunlight, we go to work. If it's lit well, and you have the right amount of breaks, etc., then again you can keep that sense of well-being for longer. And then it's important as we rest, if we're talking in an artificial stage here, that we change maybe some of the correlated color temperatures of our luminaires. So your lamps at home may be towards the warmer end of the scale, sort of 2,700 CCT, whereas in the office they may be 4,000 CCT. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about color temperatures a bit later on. So then we come on to the big one, the one that's talked about an awful lot whenever we talk about well-being and we talk about lighting in well-being, and it's circadian rhythm. And it's, this particular graph is quite an easy way of actually starting to realize what exactly is the circadian rhythm. And the circadian rhythm is basically a body clock, if you want to call it that. So when we were cavemen and women, so to speak, we would get up to the morning light and we would go to bed in the when the sun went down. That was our natural body clock. Now with the introduction of lighting, artificial lighting, it means we can extend our day, but equally we need to ensure that we still have enough rest. We still have the light levels dropping throughout the evenings and things like this, just to ensure that our body clock is not mixed up to a point where we're having restless sleep, etc. So circadian rhythm effectively keeps us in tune with our natural daily cycles, and again, many of which are influenced by the natural light. So again, we would naturally start to wake up around about 6 a.m. in the UK. That would be our sort of typical wake up times, and we would continue to be alert throughout the day. But as the evening progresses, we start to wind down, with the optimal bedtime being around 10:45. But light is physiological. It's a physiological requirement, and so can be defined on basic needs. I.e., if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the pyramid in the bottom right-hand corner that you can see, light plays a real factor in that. But other basic needs for us as humans, of course, is nutrition, water, food, water, warmth, and rest. But safety and security are also deemed as a basic need. So these are all part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anyway, enough from me for a moment. I'm now going to hand over, like I said, to Russell Foster, who's going to take over a video section for us. And there's a few of these throughout the presentation.
All life on Earth seems to have some sort of internal representation of a day. This internal clock is tweaking, fine-tuning every aspect of our physiology and behaviour to optimally exploit the daytime environment. You can gear up physiology and behaviour in advance. Core body temperature can go up, increase metabolism, increase muscular efficiency, alertness can start to rise to look out for predators. And the most important external regulatory factor is light. It's the light-dark cycle that forces the internal day to match precisely the external 24-hour rotation of the Earth.
So thank you to Russell for that video. And as I said, there will be more videos from Russell as we go through today's presentation. But if we start looking now at the exploring the effect of light on our eyes, and the well-known sort of traditional cells and retinas, i.e. the rods and the cones within our eyes, there's also been discovered a third interpreting receptor within our eyes, and this has been discovered to affect our it deals with mood and color, and it's mood and color that really sort of need to be embodied when we're looking at things like lighting and well-being. And how light is interpreted by our eyes plays a significant role in our circadian rhythm. And there's something called an SCN, which is a suprachiasmatic nucleus. Please don't ask me to say that again. But the suprachiasmatic nucleus receives signals from the eye to regulate the clock part of our brain. So that is what controls, or is partly controls the body's eye and brain regulation for our body clock, shall we say? So it is seen as our external influences of our body clock. So if we continue with the SCN part and the effects of lighting on our eyes, etc., there are two key hormones that regulate our waking and our winding down. These are cortisol and melatonin. Cortisol is basically our life's built-in alarm clock. So if you're high in melatonin, the chances are your body clock is you're waking up at dawn. Without an alarm clock, shall we say? But if your body is low in producing cortisol, you're going to need maybe a stronger alarm clock. But that is the actual human built-in alarm clock is cortisol. And conversely to that, melatonin is a hormone that the brain produces in response to darkness. So this helps us, wind down of an evening. So again, as human beings, we have natural chemicals within our body to help us wake up and to help us, go to sleep, if you like, of an evening. And being exposed to light and natural light can block melatonin production. So again, it's really, really important that when we talk about light, we realise the effect it can have both positively and, if you like, negatively. So again, when you're using things like iPads and iPhones, and obviously other makes are available, then that produces a real harsh blue light of an evening. And so it blocks your body's natural melatonin production, and therefore can sort of not allow you to go to sleep so easily, shall we say. So the SCN helps to regulate these. And without melanopsin, our body clock is interfered with, and sleep patterns again can be significantly disrupted. So melanopsin containing ganglion cells are still present in a person's eyes who are blind. Now, again, Russell's going to tell us a bit more about that in a moment, because I had to really try and get my head around that. A person who is effectively blind but still have their eyeballs in place can actually still see light and dark. But again, I'm going to hand over to Russell because he says it a lot better than I do.
We studied initially mice and then humans who had lost their visual cells. They had their eyes, but they hadn't got the rod and cone photoreceptors within the eye. And to our, I suppose, amazement, even though they were visually blind, they had no sense of vision. They could still use their eyes for the detection of the overall amount of light in the environment and set their body clocks. There had to be another class of light sensor within the eye, completely different from the rods and cones. And that led to the discovery that a small number of ganglion cells, those cells within the retina that form the optic nerve, and about 1 in 100 of those ganglion cells were shown to be directly light sensitive. And it's those cells that project to the clock centers in the brain and regulate the internal day. A more radical problem, of course, is those individuals who have lost their eyes completely.
My name is Meredith Plum, and I lost my sight when I had an accident, a chemistry experiment. In my 40s, I had no sight at all. It was explained to me that if I wanted a cosmetic improvement, that if I just let them remove the eyes and then you put a cosmetic shell over it. And then after that, started to notice the difference in my sleep patterns.
So again, thank you to Russell for that one. And that, I think that's quite a really interesting part, certainly as a lighting engineer, really interesting to know that even persons who are blind can still see light and light and dark, as it were. So I think it's really, really interesting. But if we start talking about, if we start moving on to things like hormone changes, cortisol is a hormone, as we said earlier, and it's associated with waking the body up. And melatonin, as we've already said, is the hormone that helps us to unwind. So cortisol is a hormone that's associated with adrenaline. So this is really where our fight and flight mentality comes from. So all of these things are affected by light, effectively. So with a normal circadian rhythm, it is secreted in the early morning and in the early morning dark to the light period, helping us to wake up, to focus, and to be ready for the day. That is the job of cortisol and indeed adrenaline, effectively. And again, as I've already said to you earlier, melatonin is the hormone that drives humans to winding down and ultimately towards the sleep pattern. Both of these hormones are in terms of melatonin, the hormone is naturally increases throughout the afternoon and in the evening. Again, which is why it's really, really important that we start looking at light, being able to ramp up through the day and start winding down throughout the evening. This is how we keep our body's natural circadian rhythm going. And if we start putting some technical numbers on these now, these are some of the the correlated color temperatures that we think that you're going to start you need, if you like, for full circadian rhythm. So if we wake up to a bright sunrise, an early morning, you can see the color temperatures actually starting to get colder then through noon. And again, I'll hand over to Russell in a bit, who will tell you what an absolute boost of natural daylight will do for you during the daytime hours. But then as we come through the evening, again, we're starting to come back down to 3,000 and 2,000 color temperatures. But obviously, the crucial part is now that humans spend 90% of their time indoors. So having the balance of light in our own homes, in our own offices, is more crucial than it was in yesteryear when we were outside an awful lot more. So again, if I hand over to Russell on this one.
To get a really good hit of light on the clock, you need around about 1,000 to 2,000 lux. And of course we can read, easily below 1 lux. And we live our lives in dim, dark caves. Shortly after dawn, environmental light is some 50 to 100 times brighter than average office or home lighting conditions. By noon, it's some 500 to 1,000 times brighter. If you take a lux meter to the window, you'll get about 3,000 or 4,000 lux. But a meter or so into the room, that's dropped often to below 100 lux. And that isn't sufficient to give those receptors their daily light hit to regulate the internal clock. So in many respects, I think we can think of ourselves as a light-deprived species. We're inside much of the time, and we don't appreciate how little light exposure we get because the visual system is so good at working under such a broad dynamic range.
Again, thanks to Russell for explaining that to us. So now we start looking, as I said earlier, 90% of humans now are indoor based. So if we start looking at indoor living and indoor working, etc., artificial constant light provides the role of illumination throughout the day. So if we're not going outdoors and if we're not getting that hit of light, then we need artificial light to do it for us. And it comes at a cost, should we say, because as a fixed illumination levels and color temperatures disrupt the natural color changes, so thus altering our circadian rhythm, which is crucially why tests and indeed industries now are starting to look at replicating their lighting along the natural circadian rhythm, i.e. Increasing the correlated color temperatures through the day. So constant level of 4,000 doesn't stimulate our bodies to perform at their optimum. Now, most office spaces in the UK are lit to 4,000K. And if your body's used to 4,000K all day, it won't stimulate your body to produce the chemicals that your body's requiring, really. So as we go through the day, the intensity levels need to be increased, maybe up to 6,000K, 6,500K, and indeed breaking out and going out to natural light, etc. But again, as we come through the afternoon, what we don't want is a situation where we've got 6,000K all the way till you get home, because that's again not really effective, and it won't help you either. It'll give you long-term effects. So again, how we deal with mood and color is such an important factor. So constant illuminance can be negative. So as a designer, we're looking really to tune the lighting, tune the output of maybe light levels and indeed correlated color temperatures to try and replicate the natural requirements from our body. So again, I said earlier that 1 in 6 workers feel their workplace is diminishing their well-being, and hope that, if you've probably seen from the last couple of slides, you can start to gauge and understand why that may be the case. I.e., we're all sitting in the same light level and the same color temperature all day, and therefore, as you can see in this highly busy office, the mentality of hen pet chickens comes to mind. We really need to look at human lighting in a completely different way. So the studies say 83% of workers, as I said, believe and feel that well-being is directly influenced their productivity. With some of these high-tech companies. So even with good light levels, etc., again, workers need to feel that they've got some space to move around the building, which is why, again, if you look at high-tech companies, there's so much liberal working spaces, working practices, etc. It's not only for the persons who work in there, because clearly if they're happy and they're healthy, they're going to be producing more, and so effectively that's where the business case for this starts coming in. But again, some of those numbers that you can see on screen are really quite interesting to me. So then if we look at the importance of natural light, and I think you'll have seen as I've gone through this presentation, although I'm a lighting designer and lighting is my industry, I'm not altogether partisan, because I think natural light still has a really important a principle in any lighting design. So if as a designer, it's my responsibility to utilize and harness as much natural light as I possibly can. Of course, reducing the requirement for light fixtures and fittings if need be. But more importantly, looking at who's going to be utilizing that building and how they're going to be utilizing that building. So if I can harness natural daylight, believe me, I will. So window lights, light tubes, atriums, etc. All of these things bring in natural light into a building, and all of them are our friend, really, because these are possible structural changes in a building or requirements when you're actually building the building, but the payoffs can be extraordinary. Again, just making sure that the workers within that building are happy and healthy, shall we say. So we can harness the controllability of LED beautifully now, whereas again, yesteryear when we had fluorescent tubes, etc., it was a lot more difficult to actually change some of the lighting patterns with fluorescence. But with LED now, the controllability is there for us, and we can mimic natural daylight temperatures through an automated system, and it'll change through the course of the day. And I'll show you now on the next slide what that would look like. So effectively, again, we would wake up to a 4,000K. Through noon, we would get to sort of 5.5, maybe even 6,000K. And then of an afternoon, again, we start winding it back down to 3,000K. These are mimicking natural daylight. And with LED the way it is today and the color quality that you can get from LED, this can be replicated quite easily. Yes, it's an investment in a project, but again, hopefully the benefits are there. If you look at two scenarios here where you had a they're very simple. They just shows you the difference between color temperatures really, and indeed product types effectively. I mean, clearly the room on the right hand side, albeit that it's a photocopy room, so it's a transient area, shall we say, but clearly it's a more defined light. You can see on the vertical there, on the vertical plane, that there's no scalloping on the walls, etc. But the color is significantly different as well, and that's really what this slide is about. Again, it's a bit yesteryear, I understand that, but common complaints with fluorescent back in the day. And if you think about it, there's still studies that sort of 60-70% of buildings in the UK still have fluorescent tubes. So it's really, really important that where we can try and look to change these. But the common complaints from fluorescents were back in the day were flicker. They were running on standard stroboscopic, so they were running at sort of 50 to 60 cycles. Whereas LED technology, of course, is high frequency, so you don't get that flicker so much. There's some noise associated with fluorescence. The capacitors and the ballasts, etc., are all noisy and clunky mechanical parts. That's obviously been changed with LED, and temperatures are different as well. The temperatures that the products can give out as well. But as I said, the statistic that we're in writing this presentation was 4 in 5 businesses are still yet to upgrade to LED. Quite staggering when I'm talking here about mood and color, ignoring the fact that there's only half the light, the quantity of lights in that scenario that you can see on the right compared to the left. So the argument for efficiency and efficacy of a product that I thought was already over, but clearly if 4 in 5 businesses are still to upgrade their lighting, then that argument continues. So how do we do these? How can we utilize some of these magical formulas that I've spoken about today? Again, the technology is there. We have automated controls available. We have manual controls available to us, and have had now for an awful long time. But if you look at the image on the left-hand side, that control plate, you can see there's a yellow and a blue dot. It's actually a digital plate, so you touch it and it'll transfer from both. But it'll actually help you to go from a warmer to a cooler temperature, as you can see there. So this can be manually done, or the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. These can have scene settings put together already, dealt with by the team within the office. Or indeed, again, you can go away from that manual control and go to an automated control system via BMS, etc. And it can be done automatically for people, and it can change the color temperature, but it can also change the light intensity as well. So it may be that we start off the day with lower light levels, and we increase the levels as well as the CRI as we go through the day. So now we start looking at well-being for education. A really, really important factor is education whenever you're looking at a lighting design, particularly when you're looking at well-being within a classroom, of course. And a recent small-scale study that was carried out by Light in Europe from a school in Hamburg found that learning was improved in the classrooms with a higher colour temperature and a higher level of illumination. Now, it's fair to say it was a very small survey, and of course, like lots of these surveys, they're going to have to go back and start researching and comparing notes, etc. But in a study of just 84 students, the ORF found that they improved the learning environment at 1,000 lux and 6,500 K colour temperature, compared to a secondary classroom which was lit to 500 lux and 3,500 K. So clearly there's a really broad change there. You double the light level and almost double the correlated colour temperature. So very blue end spectrum of light within those classrooms. But the pupils for the oral reading fluency, the ORF, actually showed there were improvements by this design, and this provided benefits for the students, but it also meant that the pupils were more focused on the teachers during the academic period. So again, very small scale study, but one that's really quite exciting and does need to be followed up in the coming months and years. But then we look at lighting for well-being for industrial. It doesn't stop with offices, and it doesn't stop with classrooms. It can help as well with industrial spaces as well. And a research document by 3 eminent professors on behalf of Philips, actually in 2002, so 20 years ago now, mind. But again, I'd like to see the research once that gets updated. indicate the productivity improved by 8% in industrial environments when the light levels were increased and the color temperatures were changed. Again, if you think about it in a logical state here, in a picking and packing area, people are on fast moving forklifts, etc., and making sure that the light levels are accurate, and making sure the color rendition is accurate so they can read the labels correctly will reduce their picking rate, their picking errors, of course. So they find that, again, increasing light levels can reduce picking errors here. So, but again, a note of caution. As a country, we're trying to reduce energy consumption, and while performance numbers improve and rejections decrease, i.e. picking rates are decreased, we have to be careful of making sure that we maximize the efficacy on the product so that the energy levels are not going up by 2 and 3 times. So the last few slides now, we're starting to look at things like spectral distribution here. And spectral distribution is a chart, it's a visual representation of the light spectrum produced by a light source, effectively. So this is effectively what something like an integrated sphere. If you have integrated spheres around your industry, or most lighting manufacturers have these things. This is basically what an integrated sphere will see. It's a spectral distribution. And it's the chart on the left is daylight, and the chart on the right is white LEDs. So again, it's really, really important as designers that we pick the right product when we're designing and when we're putting in light fittings into an environment, because clearly you can see the daylight on the left hand side benefits from an awful lot more color spectrum than just a white LED. The white LED is picking up an awful lot of blue, as you can see, but not a lot in terms of the reds, etc. Now that can be changed because you can use products with higher R9 values, etc., towards the higher end of the red end of the spectrum. So they can be changed, but it's important that you can see what natural daylight can give you and what a white LED can give you. Again, really, really high peak intensities with blue, but the reds are taken off, shall we say. And again, as I said, this is what an integrating sphere will see, and this is what, when you have a photometry, a photometric file from a manufacturer, and you ask them for their spectral distribution, this is what they'll be able to produce for you. And I think the one critical part that sometimes gets overlooked, and it's really, really important, that's why it's in this presentation today, is well-being for shift workers. Because I guess, whenever we think about work, the majority of us think about it from 9 to 5, shall we say. But there's an awful lot of our colleagues around the country that do shift working, and it's really, really crucial that we help them if we can with light, with the right light levels, with the right CCT levels, etc. Because when they're going to sleep, the country is awake, and therefore natural light is at its brilliant, at its most brilliant, shall we say. And so it may be that they need to change some of the, particularly if on shift patterns we can use automated systems, we can actually put, for want of a better phrase, 2 body clocks in place. If you work at a 12-12, let's say, so the one 12-hour will be ramping up as the other one, as the staff are coming in at sort of an evening, and then ramping down as they're going home in the morning. And then when the next shift pattern comes in, as they're coming in the morning, the light levels and the CCT numbers can be increased, etc. And so we go on. But again, that would require more in terms of automation. But again, it can be done. But it's crucial that again, we have to managing their melatonin levels, preventing tiredness and keeping them awake and alert during shift, for their benefit and of course for the employers' benefit is crucial. But again, we've got to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons, and the right reasons are improving people's well-being and not treating them, like I said earlier, like battery hens. That's really, really crucial. There was really quickly, there was a really small study published by the Design and Health Scientific Review, and it was carried out by a lady called Anna Wurz, and Anna Wurz Justice, excuse me, and she's a PhD as her profession, and so she stated that by installing brighter lights on a psychiatric ward, depressed patients had a 3-day shorter duration of hospitalization. Now, again, it was a very small study, and respectfully, again, when pandemic, etc., hit, a lot of these studies have stopped. And so we need to, get back to some of these now and start, really stress testing some of these studies and making sure that they stood up to scrutiny. But if you can imagine that you can reduce hospitalization by 3 days, if indeed that stacks up now, that's a massive benefit, to all of us, and indeed crucially to the patient, of course. Now, I said earlier I would look at the ONS again and look at some of their numbers in regard to absence through sickness in the UK. And again, this particular study was carried out in 2017. So, pre-pandemic, of course, and again, post-pandemic, some of these numbers are going to change and going to have to be updated, of course. But crucially, they claim on the 2018 study that we increased the total of sick days in the UK to 141.4 million sickness absence days were recorded in the UK. That's 4.4 days per worker per year. So you start putting some actual numbers to that in terms of value, and you can see that well over £1 billion was lost by businesses from employees reporting sickness and absence. Now, some of that could be obviously, lots of reasons, but if we look at it from a lighting perspective, possibly the environment may have helped them. If it was caused through headaches from flicker, etc., then, as I said earlier, LED will help with things like that. But crucially, things like we said earlier, water and comfort in terms of heat, etc., natural HVAC ventilation, etc. All of these things play a crucial part. I'm not just saying that lighting will resolve these issues; it won't. But according to Lighting Europe, a well-designed lighting project can attribute to 4.5% productivity increase and a 1% fall in absence. So if you can reduce that number of absences, that 131 million absences, by even 1% by changing your lighting, it really does need to be considered. So if my maths is right, and the UK average salary is £36,611 in 2019, then an average of 291 working days per year. So multiply that 1.41 is a significant number, 177 billion. So 1% of that is 177 million if we adopt a well-designed lighting project. So I said I was going to put a business case to it. I think that's a really strong business case. I've looked at it from a human element. Of course I did. That was the first 28 slides. But if you look at it as a business element on this slide, there's a significant impact in just avoiding sickness through a well-lit environment. So just finishing up, our circadian rhythm it's a 24-hour cycle. It synchronizes our bodily functions, and it's influenced by natural and artificial light. If our circadian rhythm is disrupted, such as through the use of poor artificial lighting, this can be significantly detrimental on our well-being. Modern lighting solutions can create workplace environments that are fully suited to improving well-being among staff. And as I said earlier, the lighting designers, lighting engineers, we've really got an important part to play in this. We need to look to harness as much natural daylight as we can. And when we have to use artificial lighting, we use the correct artificial lighting for the correct reasons. And I think that, if we do that, then hopefully we end up with our client's best interest at heart. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very, very much for your time. I hope you got something out of that, you enjoyed it. I'm going to ask Rebecca if there are any questions, and I'll do my best to answer any of those. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you, Darren. We're now going to move on to the Q&A session. So we've had quite a few interesting questions come through. Okay, so the first one is, many trends come and go for workplace design, open plan offices, private booths, creative writable walls, for example. Do you think this lighting for well-being in the workplace movement is a fad, or do you believe that it's a permanent development that's here to stay?
Thank you very much for that question. Obviously, a difficult question to start with, and you know, these are my opinions, of course. But I think, in my opinion, no, it's not a fad. The pandemic obviously set us back in terms of timings for lighting and well-being strategy. I think that goes without saying. But the challenges that were here in the offices, in office lighting prior to the pandemic, are still here today. And yes, I think there will be permanent. This will be a permanent development. However, it's obviously endured a slow uptake in the last 24 months. But to answer your question directly, no, I don't believe it's a fad, and I do think that the challenges that we experienced are still here in the offices today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Darren. So the next question. So since the pandemic and our newfound hybrid form of working, how has lighting for wellbeing in the workplace grown? Have you seen a surge in specifiers approaching you with queries and new projects?
Yeah, so another really interesting question there, and I think, you know, a little bit of the answer I gave earlier still applies, i.e. the challenges are still there in office lighting today. However, now that the hybrid model has now meant as well as thinking about well-being when designing, we also need to consider controls in much greater detail to offer the flexibility to offices, irrespective of the working numbers on a particular day. Again, we set out as designers to design the building as a full building, but clearly, if we're reducing the numbers within an office space, the design still needs to be well thought out, but the management of controlling the lights around a smaller number of patrons needs to be more involved in a design now. But the actual well-being message, irrespective of whether you've got 50 workers or 5 workers, still needs to be in place.
Perfect. So question 3. Well-being in the workplace was a hot topic before COVID-19. When do you think this awareness really came to the fore?
So I think the awareness of colour temperature and light levels and mood has been around for many years in lighting design. And, you know, the tubes that were brought out, Activa tubes, 9,000 and 17,000 lamps, were around sort of 15, 20 years ago. So the actual desire to change, use lighting to change people's moods has been around an awful long time. But I think with the introduction of LED as a light source, it's actually given us an opportunity to, with the ease of switching cycles, the ability to change the tunable chipset in a luminaire. This has been really a game changer, because the ease and availability of functionality continues to help us. But yeah, have no doubt the pursuit of higher correlated color temperatures and arguably higher light levels has been around, again, 15, 20 years. I personally looked at a project in 2002, 2003, where they wanted increased correlated color temperatures in their lamps, and on that particular project they had 2 color lamps within a fitting. So yeah, no, I think the ambition has been there for a number of years, but LED has just helped us evolve the process and has helped us to control the output of the luminaires a lot easier than fluorescent tubes did.
Lovely, thank you, Darren. So our 4th question is, whilst there are many forward-thinking workplaces out there, many are still living in the dark ages. When do you think the need for wellbeing focused offices will become more widespread?
Yeah, always a difficult question to answer, I guess. Ultimately, it comes down to investment decisions. You know, there's a balance between risk and reward, I guess. You know, from an employer's point of view, some projects can be increased in terms of capital expenditure by putting in luminaires with circadian rhythm cycles built in, etc. But I think if they look and if they start reviewing the independent data, and it is independent data, I think that's the critical thing. You know, provided in this presentation and indeed multiple sources online, a client can realise that in their own business they can save maybe 100 hours of absences from work, from colleagues being absent from work through illness. That may be improved by improving their light, improving their correlated colour temperatures, improving their light levels, and actually thinking about their design in a different way. Instead of looking at it sometimes as just a capital investment, look at it as a risk to reward, i.e., if we can reduce our absence days, then that model can be costed effectively. And I think it mitigates some of the cost questions, and it does make the decision a little bit easier. But then if you look in certain metropolitan areas of the country, attracting the right staff can be really, really expensive. And so if you recruit the right staff, looking after their well-being, and in the case of lighting, ensuring their workplace is lit well, firstly, and their circadian rhythm, with circadian rhythm in mind, then that modest investment in lighting can actually pay dividends, because obviously we want to keep the good employees that we've got within our teams.
Thank you, Darren. So our next one is quite tricky. So while you can manage the lighting an employee is subjected to within your own premises and help their well-being in the workplace, you obviously cannot control their exposure outside the office. So if a worker spends an elongated period in the evenings in front of blue light in the form of a smartphone, would appropriate office lighting help the adverse effects at all?
Yeah, thanks for that, Bex. That's of all the questions, that's probably the most difficult to answer, but we'll give it a go. I suppose it's difficult to control somebody's home life. It's impossible, of course it is. But I guess if they can see if they can see and experience the benefits within their working lives with circadian rhythm lighting as an example, they may be more inclined to seek out blue light filters or even lower CCT lamps within their own home. The lighting industry, along with smart devices, can offer tunable luminaires for home life as well as work, of course. I think that's a practical solution. But in terms of whether or not going back into the office the next day will reverse or the adverse effects, I guess it's quite a tricky one, really, because it's not it's not like changing your factor 50 sun cream to a factor 30 sun cream, etc. Yes, they're both sun creams, I guess, but I think people need to be able to see the benefits of working in an office space with well-being at heart, and I think they would more likely adopt it in their own homes rather than the office making up for any bad decisions they make in their home.
Excellent. That's a really good answer. Really good answer. I was actually showing my partner your diagram on this presentation and telling him he needs to stop looking at his phone because of the bad blue light at night time. He was not impressed.
It really does just increase your melatonin levels and you're back up and running again. So it's really difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to finish with this question. You spoke about shift workers earlier. How could you cater to meet everyone's needs when there's a crossover in shifts? For example, staff beginning their late shifts crossing over with staff coming to the end of their working day.
Yeah, I think this is actually not as difficult as it sounds, really. There's a digitalized control strategy that you can put in place that functions in line with work clocks, so you can ensure you can accommodate shift patterns. You probably would replace manual controls with digitalized controls to actually set it on your work clocks, and it's a fairly simple process. I mean, obviously the shift patterns would have to have some sort of downtime. You're not necessarily going to go 5 seconds into from one to the next, but yeah, it's a relatively simple process if you use a digitalized system effectively.
Okay, fantastic. I hope you found that all very useful and informative. I want to thank our speaker, Darren, for his time and imparting his knowledge. And I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for taking the time out and sending across all your questions. If you do have any further questions, you can send them across to Darren. We're going to pop his email address in the sidebar, and Darren will get back to you when he can. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and goodbye.